access for foster youth. So before we start, I want to just take a moment to review the technical details of the web seminar to make sure everyone is able to connect with us and hear the audio and see the slideshow. So as you can see, the call-in number for the web seminar is on your screen, followed by the access code. And we hope throughout the presentation you will submit your questions or comments in the control panel on the right-hand side. Today's presentation should be about 40 to 45 minutes, and we hope we can hear from you whether the recommendations that we're putting forth are meeting the mark, if they resonate with you, or if there are ones that we haven't included. Following today's web seminar, all the materials and the audio will be posted on the California College pathways.org website. So before we jump into the content of today's web seminar, let's really talk about why we developed this publication. Why are we talking about college? Isn't foster care really about younger children, more of a 0 to 6 or even middle or high school? How can we be thinking about the post-secondary education needs of young people in foster care? Well, first, it's very important to note that as this first bullet indicates, in the last 10 years, California has really had a serious transformation in how it thinks about the educational needs of children and youth in foster care. AB 490, landmark legislation, was passed almost 10 years ago, which squarely put the educational needs of foster youth on the map. And since then, we've had a number of other major reforms, including most recently the inclusion of foster youth in the local control funding formula. And so we now know that, when we think of permanency, safety, and well-being, the educational status of young people is squarely within the well-being of the needs of children, youth, and foster care. Now, while we've made progress, we have made very little progress in post-secondary ed. We have very few policies on the book that really support college enrollment and access. While we have changed our foster care system significantly, in many respects, our system is still structured as a handoff. We still have a handoff mentality where we're handing off our young people from the foster care system to the post-secondary education system, when in fact, with extended foster care, it really is no longer a handoff. We are supporting young people to age 21, and really, given that age, that is when young people exit high school and get their first couple years of college. So we have a number of amazing programs throughout the state, and I don't want to in any way diminish the importance of those programs. Guardian Scholars programs, Renaissance Scholars programs. I mean, people around the state, in the community, are working so hard to meet the needs of young people in foster care. However, what we haven't done is brought public policy and institutional infrastructure to these programs to support them, to make sure that they are sustainable for the long term, to make sure that we're addressing the issue of promoting post-secondary education on multiple fronts. Yes, we will have programs on campuses, and we will change policies to ensure young people reach post-secondary education. And clearly, now more than ever, the time is now to make these significant changes. We've had a fundamental change in our foster care demographics due to AB 12. We have almost 10,000 18 to 21-year-olds in foster care in California. And the promise of AB 12 has always been that this is not the old foster care. This is something new and different. And to fulfill the promise of AB 12 and the promise of extended foster care, ensuring young people reach their post-secondary goals is critical to that. We know they have these aspirations. Survey after survey documents that. So the question now is, how can we all restructure how we work with foster youth to make post-secondary education an expectation, not an extra, but an expectation. And really to bring that post-secondary education support squarely within the child welfare practice. So that really is our hope, is to really reframe our system to say it's not if they're going to college, it's where they're going to college, so that we can bring the very unfortunate rates of college degree attainment, which are roughly almost 5 times lower than the general population, up to on par with the general population. And why is that important? I mean, it's important for so many reasons, but this next slide really lays it out quite unequivocally, that if we exit young people from foster care without at least some type of college degree, associate's degree or bachelor's degree, you can see right here how the rates of unemployment are directly correlated to the rate of education and the median weekly earnings as well. And so in terms of the long-term economic security of foster youth, helping them move into higher education while they are in foster care is essential. And by doing that, we're really going to see the long-term dividends, really seeing the young people have economic security, having the income to be successful parents, and move out of poverty and really change the cycle of foster care forever. So that's the economic reason. I also want to just point out there are reasons far beyond economics, in that by having a degree, we're going to give young people the same opportunity we all want for our children, which is the opportunity to have a vocation that we love and that is satisfying. I think about that regularly and feel so fortunate, and we want all of our foster youth to have that same benefit so they can experience a work life where they feel fulfillment and happiness and satisfaction. So that is as important as the economic benefits. And so we have developed this policy agenda really to achieve this. And before we jump into it, I want to just tell you a little bit about what it is. This policy agenda has been about, and I'm just going to go back here so you don't need to look at that, has been about 1 year in the making. Over the past year, this policy agenda has been led by my colleague, Debbie Rauscher, who leads the California College Pathways Project here at the John Burton Foundation. And she has gone up and down the state and talked to many, many different people in the field, both of child welfare and post-secondary education. In-depth interviews with over 50 professionals, extensive interviews with students on campuses, really working to vet ideas, to understand where is the sweet spot, where are the recommendations that have the rare combination of being highly impactful and yet feasible. And so over the course of the last year, through these extensive interviews, through a high level of policy analysis, the John Burton Foundation has arrived on these 17 recommendations. We believe these 17 recommendations are achievable within the next 5 years. And we believe that if we achieve these 17 recommendations, we will make a significant difference in the level of post-secondary achievement among foster youth in California. Now, we can't tell you exactly what it will be or whether it will be on par with the general population, but of the many competing approaches out there, these 17 were the ones that met that, very challenging criteria of highly impactful and yet feasible in our current political and economic context. So I want to thank all of you who are on this web seminar, who took the time to give your points of views on what the policy should be, with special recognition to the Community College Chancellor's Office, Tim Bunnell and Colleen Ammerman, who continue to provide such important guidance to our work to help us understand how we can knit together these two important systems. So many people within the child welfare system, both in the public sector and the private sector, and as well as allies to use, including CASAs. So I know you are very busy, you have a lot on your plate, and you took the time to share your points of view and to help us understand what we can do. So thank you. So this is a special thanks specific thanks to the Stewart Foundation and the Walter S. Johnson Foundation, who are the lead funders of the California College Pathways Project. Together, 10 years ago, these organizations said, you know what, we need to promote post-secondary college attainment, and since then they have been doing that. And we're able to do the work that we do because of their generous financial support. So it's important to acknowledge the important role that they've played. So the recommendations you're going to hear are intended for a very specific audience. We want these recommendations to get into the hands of policymakers who are looking to make a difference for foster youth in post-secondary education. We want these recommendations to get in the hands of advocates, those of you who are in the Capitol, meeting with public officials, meeting with others to try and move the ball forward. Please take a look at these and think about whether these recommendations could find a place on your agenda for this year and upcoming years. They're also intended for campus representatives and representatives of the child welfare system. There are things we can do locally to change our practices to make post-secondary education more accessible for foster youth. And so we're hoping that you can hear these and think about what specific role your organization can play in pushing them forward, and that we can find ways amongst all of us in the state to partner to achieve these 17 recommendations. Now, at the John Burton Foundation, the 3 that we are going to start with that you'll hear much more about are the ones you see on your screen. The implementation of SB 1023, a campus-based support program for foster youth in community colleges. Second, changes in the administration of the Chafee Education and Trading Voucher. And then the third is a streamlining of the verification of foster youth status. And so, you're going to hear more about each one of these, but I just wanted to share with you to start out with that that's where our priorities are for the current year. But we are more than happy and very interested in partnering with others who want to pursue these agenda items, understanding that nothing ever happens unless we all work together. So with that, I want to turn it over to Debbie Rauscher, who is the principal author of this publication, who is going to really jump in and start presenting these recommendations. Thank you, Debbie.
Thank you very much, Amy, for that wonderful framing of what this report is all about. So the way that this report is structured is that we identified 6 barriers to post-secondary, 7 barriers to post-secondary participation, and then looked at what some of the potential policy solutions would be to each one of those barriers. So we're going to walk through the barriers and then follow that up with the policy solutions that we think should be put in place to address each of the individual barriers. So the first one that you see on your screen is that foster youth are not academically prepared for college, and there's quite a lot of evidence to support this. There's been a number of reports that clearly document that students in foster care are a distinct subgroup of at-risk students. Their educational outcomes tend to be consistently poorer than those of not only the broader general population of students, but also English language learners, students with disabilities, and those with low socioeconomic status. As the chart on your screen demonstrates, you can see that far fewer foster youth are proficient in the basic skills that are necessary to succeed at college. Students in foster care are less likely to pass the California high school exit exam, more likely to drop out, and less likely to graduate than the statewide student population. The lack of preparation is also reflected in the high rates of foster youth that place into remedial courses upon entry into community college and CSUs. And we see that typically the percentage of foster youth requiring remediation upon entry is much greater than that of the general student population. And when students have to spend several years completing basic coursework before ever taking a transfer-eligible course, they often get discouraged and drop out. In addition, they can end up using up their financial aid, which has very strict time limits on having to take all of these remedial courses. So what is the solution to this barrier? There's a couple that we've identified. The first is that folks on the call may be familiar with the local control funding formula. This is the new funding mechanism for school districts. It requires every school district to develop something called a Local Control Accountability Plan, LCAP, which specifies specifically how the district is going to address a few different populations, one of which is foster youth. The State Board of Education has until October 1st of this year, 2015, to adopt an evaluation rubric, which will be used to determine whether districts have met the performance goals that they specify in their LCAP. There was an analysis done recently by Education Trust West that showed that most district plans did not actually specifically address foster youth in their LCAPs, apart from saying that they'll receive the same services as all students. There was a couple notable exceptions to this, for example, the Los Angeles Unified School District, but the most part, the LCAPs, in terms of their level of specificity as it relates to foster youth, was not adequate. And so one of the first recommendations that we have is that when the State Board of Education is looking at developing this rubric this year, to really make sure that there are adequate accountability mechanisms for foster youth outcomes so that the promise of the local control funding formula is not lost for foster youth. The second recommendation actually has two parts to it, and it relates to a program known as Foster Youth Services. Foster Youth Services programs are operated through the county offices of education to support students within the K-12 system. And there's a couple of ways in which we think that this could be modified. So the first is that Foster Youth Services right now provides a lot of direct support like counseling, tutoring, mentoring, that type of thing. And the Foster Youth Services program, the way that foster youth are defined is misaligned with the definition of foster youth within LCFF. LCFF includes all foster youth, regardless of where they're placed. And those who are receiving family reunification or family maintenance services count as a foster youth within the definition of LCFF, whereas the FYS definition is limited to those foster youth placed in more traditional foster care settings. So those who end up in a relative caregiver placement or who are working on family reunification or family maintenance to be able to continue to live with their biological family are not defined as a foster youth within FYS and therefore are not eligible to receive the services. So this misalignment is creating confusion, for one thing, for both school districts and county offices of education. And more importantly, it means foster children placed with relatives, as well as those who are receiving family maintenance services or family reunification support, are not eligible or funded to receive the support provided by FYS programs. So our first recommendation under this is that these definitions be aligned so that the Foster Youth Services program can be made available to all foster youth and not just a subset of the foster youth population. The second recommendation is that the state of California leverage federal funding that's available to match the Foster Youth Services program. Title 4E of the Social Security Act provides federal funds to support certain activities, and the activities provided within FYS are eligible for this match. There's a handful of counties where child welfare agencies and county office of education have entered into MOUs and have begun receiving Title 4E funds in order to supplement the resources available through the FYS program. But the majority of counties have not taken advantage of this. So we would encourage the state of California to explore how they can expand the capacity for leverage of the federal funds, thereby expanding the larger pool of money available for this program. So the second barrier is that foster youth lack knowledge regarding the matriculation process. So there's a lot of research that shows that foster youth who delay entrance into community college for 1 year or more after high school graduation are 40% less likely to continue as compared to those who enroll right after the 12th grade. Foster youth who experience frequent placement and school changes may face challenges in developing relationships with supportive adults and might not have the knowledge necessary to be able to enroll in college right after their senior year. In particular, college matriculation processes, even at the community college level, have gotten increasingly complex in recent years. With the recent implementation of the Student Success Act, matriculation into community college requires attending an orientation, completing assessment tests, working with an academic counselor to prepare an education plan, paying fees, enrolling in courses. If a foster youth wants to access priority enrollment, they have to begin completing all of these activities really by mid-spring. At four-year universities, the process begins even earlier. Fall term applications are due on November 30th of the previous year. And so if foster youth don't have somebody in their lives who's knowledgeable about these timelines, they often miss deadlines and can't enroll in classes in a timely manner and in the time frame in which they hope to. In addition, financial aid applications have to be submitted well in advance. March 2nd is the deadline to be able to receive maximum financial aid. And again, a lot of foster youth are not aware of these deadlines, and they miss out on a lot of financial aid that they should be eligible for. So what are the solutions to this? There's a few policy recommendations that we have. One relates back to foster youth services, which I just spoke about a minute ago, and it relates not as much to the support for academic preparation, but more around making sure that post-secondary preparation and transition, understanding all of these matriculation processes, is included within the mandate of FYS programs. Programs right now vary considerably across the state to the degree to which they work specifically on preparation for post-secondary education. And given the implementation of AB 12 that Amy talked about earlier, the responsibility of the child welfare system now really does go beyond high school graduation. With the implementation of the local control funding formula, additional resources may be available through the districts for some of the direct services that foster youth services previously had been involved with, and this opens up an opportunity for foster youth services coordinators to take a greater role in supporting system integration and providing assistance to local districts with their system improvements. And so we would encourage that there be more mandates within these potential changes to ensure that system coordination includes the post-secondary system. And in particular, that post-secondary educational representatives be added to the list of mandated participants for FYS advisory committees. The second recommendation is about training and making sure that caregivers are trained on post-secondary education and things like what I just spoke about, financial aid, deadlines, admission, matriculation requirements. Caregivers, we believe, are best positioned to do this because they're in the daily lives of young people, and we think that there's a couple different kinds of caregivers that should be trained. One is foster parents and kinship caregivers, and the second is group home and foster family agency staff. So there are specific mandates within the law about what kinds of trainings foster parents, group home staff, and FFA staff have to undergo. So our recommendation is that post-secondary education be added to this list of mandated trainings, in particular for anybody who has a young person who is over the age of 13 in their care. We also recognize that adding this will require that the number of hours of training that's required be expanded as well in order to accommodate this new training topic that would be made part of the mandate. And finally, our recommendation is to fund and enforce existing mandates in state law. There actually was a law, AB 2463, enacted all the way back in 1996 that specifies some requirements for Cal State EOP programs and community college EOPS programs to be informing foster youth of their services, and that mandates some collaboration between CDSS, CSAC, who manages financial aid, and county child welfare agencies in order to support specifically outreach efforts to foster youth. However, this wasn't really funded in a meaningful way, and so there could be more done to fully implement this law that's already on the books. The third barrier is that foster youth do not have access to adequate financial aid. There was a research study done by the Public Policy Institute that students who receive grants and scholarships are significantly more likely to earn a bachelor's degree. This holds true even after you control for other institutional and student characteristics like high school grade point average and family income. Studies find, however, unfortunately, that foster youth who apply for financial aid don't typically get all the financial aid for which they should be eligible. So while 84% receive a Pell Grant, only 17% receive a Cal Grant, and 9% receive a Chafee Grant. Less than 4% of youth studied of foster youth who completed a FAFSA received all three forms of grant aid. So there's several obstacles to this. One is lack of information about application deadlines, in particular the March 2nd Cal Grant deadline. And second is that there's simply not enough money for Chafee. Last year there were 18,000 eligible applicants for Chafee grants, and only 3,500 actually received funds because there simply is not enough money in the pot to go around. It's likely that the true number of unfunded eligible youth is greater than this, as there are some youth who hear from peers that they don't receive grants, and so they decide not to bother to apply. And finally, a barrier related to financial aid is that Chafee grants are often received well after the term begins. And there's some antiquated ways in which the Chafee administrative process functions. And as a result, there's a first round of funding that goes out, and then those who don't take the grants for some reason because perhaps they didn't enroll in school, those checks have to be sent back, and there's a waiting period, and it takes quite a while for those to be reissued then to the next person on the list. And so it goes on and on and on, and sometimes people don't receive their grants until well after the beginning of the term and well after they need the money, when their tuition is due, when they have to start paying rent, when they have to purchase books, etc. So what are our policy recommendations to address the financial aid barriers? One is that I mentioned a minute ago that a lot of foster youth miss out, in particular on the Cal Grant, because they are not aware of deadlines. So we are proposing that county social workers be tasked to screen age-appropriate youth for financial aid eligibility. This would not mean that county social workers would have to become experts on filling out the FAFSA, but at a minimum, they would know about the March 2nd deadline. They would ensure that foster youth who are seniors in high school are informed about the deadline and that they know where to go to receive help completing the FAFSA. And there's quite a lot of resources that can be referred to as long as the youth knows that they exist. The second recommendation is that there be more money for Chafee. So according to our calculations, it would require about an additional $50 million in order to fully fund all of the foster youth based on current application rates. So we are recommending an additional investment of $50 million in order to make this extremely valuable program available to greater numbers of youth. And finally, there's something called CalSave in the state of California, which allows the mechanism for creating college savings accounts for designated groups of students. And so both individuals and organizations can use the state's existing ScholarShare program to set up scholarship funds. So we're recommending that research be conducted to determine how this option could be expanded to provide additional scholarship resources to foster youth. For example, individual campus foundations could establish accounts for direct donations to these accounts, or accounts could be set up for corporate giving or matching programs. The next recommendation that we have is around increasing the effectiveness of the Chafee program, and Amy mentioned that this is one of our priorities for 2015. So there's a few ways in which the Chafee administrative system could be improved. One is upgrading the system to allow for electronic payments. Right now everything happens through paper checks. The second is that eventually, if an electronic system can be put in place, that also would allow for over-awarding of grants, which is something that actually currently happens within the Cal Grant program. So for example, in the Cal Grant system, Cal Grant in 13-14 made $29,000 offers for competitive Cal Grants, which is actually 30% above the award cap. But they ended up paying out only 90% of the cap because they know that a certain number of students are not going to be able to take the awards. And being able to set up a similar system with the Chafee grant system would mean that you would no longer have this problem of having to recycle the money over and over again before it finally gets to the final student who receives it. Eliminate the need for a needs analysis report. This is sort of a technical piece around how the application is processed that would make it more efficient and speed things up considerably. Ensure that any upgrades to a new grant delivery system for the state in general fully incorporate Chafee grants, and also to increase the reach of available funds, exclude colleges that don't meet Cal Grant standards for loan default and graduation rates from also receiving Chafee grants. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Cecilia, who's going to go through some of our additional recommendations.
Thank you, Debbie. So with our next barrier, it really speaks to the struggle that foster youth encounter when they try to verify their status in order to access services and benefits that they're eligible for. We're talking about campus support programs, qualifying for priority enrollment so they can register for classes early, the ability to claim independent status when they're filing their FAFSA, and many others. Under the law, foster youth are supposed to receive documentation of foster care status before their 18th birthday. But this documentation is often lost, and in some cases, the youth never receives it, especially if they leave care before their 18th birthday. Unfortunately, we found from speaking to many campuses as well as to foster youth on those campuses that the process for obtaining documentation can be incredibly cumbersome and confusing and very discouraging. To get this documentation, youth have to identify the appropriate person from their county of jurisdiction. And for a youth who's moved many times, they may not even know which county this is. And if they're unable to contact their social worker, this may be a big dead end. We've heard stories from students who've traveled from their college in San Francisco to go back to LA to get the right documents, and other cases where the delay actually makes priority enrollment not even beneficial to them because they had a 3-day delay. So we found that colleges are sometimes inconsistent also about what is considered acceptable documentation. And in the end, the result is that the youth risk missing important deadlines for critical, very critical resources like financial aid that can lead them to drop out. So solutions for this. We know right now that the Department of Social Services is currently in the process of remaking their data system, and this new system would include a function to let foster youth older than 18 access verification documents online. Unfortunately, the reality is that this isn't going to be available for several years. In the meantime, we need a centralized system so that youth anywhere in the state can get their information with ease in a timely manner, and whether or not they're still in care or are former foster youth. There shouldn't be a barrier to verification if they're unsure of what county has or had jurisdiction over their case. And the intent is really to not send them on a wild goose chase and have them passed off from person to person to track down this information. Our next barrier is really about foster youth retention in colleges. For many who get through the door and make it to college, there still is an enormous challenge of being able to stay there. We found through a Michigan State University study that 34% of foster youth dropped out before earning a degree compared to 18% of their non-foster peers. That's almost twice the rate. And at 26, only 8% had a post-secondary degree compared to 47% of their counterparts. And then in looking at studies within our state, we found one study that showed 41% of foster youth in community colleges coming back for their second year as opposed to 62% of their counterparts. These outcomes, as with others we've talked about, are far worse for foster youth than they are for same-age youth with similar socioeconomic backgrounds. So the policy recommendation here is that, well, we know that through community college studies that the students tend to graduate from community college at 4.1 years, or twice the traditional 2-year commitment. And a big part of this is often because of insufficient course offerings. The catch-22 for a foster youth is that they must take classes in order to remain eligible for financial aid. So in taking classes that they don't need, they oftentimes end up exceeding the federal time limits and hit their unit cap for aid in the long run. Foster youth currently have priority enrollment, meaning that they're a subgroup in the student population that allows them to register for classes before everyone else. But the law that allows this has a sunset clause of 2017. So our recommendation is to extend or eliminate the sunset clause. And also, in addition to that, we recommend expanding eligibility to align the definition of foster youth to the FAFSA definition, which would allow for priority enrollment if you're a foster youth after the age of 13. The second recommendation for this barrier is putting in place a provision for judges and hearing officers to do a comprehensive review of educational status during their 6-month review hearings. This regular monitoring would include information about their K-12 education, college preparation, if they need help applying for financial aid and if they've received it and applied for it. And these kinds of reports would be very helpful in documenting youth educational history, in addition to holding the caregivers accountable for providing that support. And thirdly, this recommendation is a really crucial one. In addition to educational help, campus support programs provide the type of safety net that parents often provide for non-foster youth. They provide emotional support, emergency funds, housing assistance, and they also provide a community of students that come from a similar background. Right now, we have campus support programs at 21 out of the 22 CSUs and all 12 of the UC campuses. This program also exists at the community college level, but their numbers are limited. And these programs exist primarily because of private philanthropy, which makes their funding precarious at times. And so a state investment would be incredibly significant in improving outcomes for foster youth. So our number one priority in this report is, in this year, is funding SB 1023. SB 1023 created a supplemental component in the existing extended opportunity programs and services for 10 community college districts. And just to clarify, community college districts means up to 20 campuses. And this new program would focus on meeting the needs of current and former foster youth. It would provide services that include outreach, recruitment, retention services, tutoring and counseling, as well as independent living and financial literacy support. And just to take a moment to talk about why EOPS, we really focused on EOPS because we know that it's on every campus already, and it also has a long-standing mission to serve at-risk youth in higher ed. And so the thought process behind that was that staff would have familiarity working with this population. Additionally, there's a very solid evidence base to support that EOPS provides positive outcomes in retention, degree completion, and other indicators of post-secondary success. This bill was signed in the last legislative cycle, but it wasn't passed with any funds attached to it, and we still need the $7 million to fully implement the program. We've been in close communication with the Chancellor's Office of Community Colleges, and they've been incredibly supportive to the extent that they've secured funding for the planning process, which means that if we're able to get a budget allocation for the program, we would be able to hit the ground running almost immediately. And this is an incredible opportunity to serve up to 4,000 foster youth. It's such an extreme opportunity to make a difference, and we want to make sure that happens. So finding funding for this to create these support programs is the policy priority for the year. And just as fair warning, we will be using this registration list to send out advocacy emails. So looking at the next barrier, we wanted to talk about foster youth having inadequate access to housing, including during summer breaks. In a survey of California and Washington State foster youth in college, 97% said that housing assistance was important or very important to their success. Yet in the same survey, the same youth said that securing housing was one of the biggest challenges that they had. This issue is very unique to foster youth. Oftentimes when a campus closes its doors for long holidays, which can mean up to a month if you're talking about winter breaks at a school and a semester schedule, and then also during summer breaks, many foster youth have nowhere to go. Current law requires that campuses with campus housing open during breaks and holidays must prioritize foster youth. But even on campuses where this is an option, it wouldn't help a foster youth who wasn't enrolled in classes during the summer and not receiving financial aid. So what ends up happening is that a lot of foster youth end up couch surfing or returning to bio parents and just settings that may be toxic or unstable for them. This issue exists for community college students as well, but it's typically less about finding housing during breaks and holidays and more about a broader struggle to access affordable housing, since few community colleges have dorms. So some solutions that we came up with after speaking with campuses is Well, the first is expanding access to THP plus SC. THP plus SC is a placement option for non-minor dependents that provides supportive services while allowing the youth to live on their own. It's been around for only 2 years, but we can see the success and the high demand for it. It's grown as a placement serving 6% of non-minor dependents, now serving 12%. But I think that from our understanding of the program and the desire for it, there are many youth who would still benefit from it, who want to be in it, but the capacity is just not quite there yet. Right now, the majority of non-minor dependents in college are living in SILPs, where they're receiving benefits but no supportive services. So the availability of this type of housing would be incredibly beneficial, including not just getting year-round housing, but also educational and employment and independent living skills training through the wraparound services that they provide. And a great example of this is actually at CSU San Marcos, where their program has made a college dormitory a THP plus SC program, so that the foster youth on that campus can have the typical dorm experience while also receiving the supportive services that they benefit from. And in terms of summer housing, we've seen campuses reserve dorms and university-owned apartments to house students for the summer at a subsidized rate. And a very key and exemplary model of this is SF State, where there are 10 fully furnished campus-owned apartments that are reserved to house up to 40 foster youth year-round. And it's such a critical support for them, and we definitely think that these all are types of solutions that other campuses can replicate. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Debbie to finish up our last barrier and recommendations.
Thanks so much, Cecilia. So the final barrier is that adequate data to track foster youth progress is not available. It's impossible to assess which interventions are most successful without knowing how well foster youth are performing academically and how their outcomes compare to other students. There have been some important steps that have been taken in recent years. The community college system in 2012 added a foster youth identifier within their statewide data system, and both the CSU and UC systems also request applicants to report foster care status on their admissions applications. In addition, philanthropic partners have been very instrumental in partnering with a system called CalPass Plus to facilitate better access to foster youth data. CalPass Plus obtains data from the community college system as well as some K-12 school districts and four-year universities, and they're actually producing a data dashboard that specifically will provide outcome information for foster youth. However, despite these advances, many issues remain about both data accuracy and availability. Not all campuses have systems in place to accurately track which students are current and former foster youth. There's no mechanism in place for any college to easily confirm foster youth status. It's largely based on self-report by the students. And in addition, the only system currently with the capacity to produce extensive aggregated foster youth data is CalPass Plus. Not all campuses participate in CalPass Plus, however, and the information that's available through CalPass Plus is not widely accessible due to data sharing agreements that are in place that govern that system. So the recommendations for addressing this problem, we've got a couple. So the first is that a data sharing mechanism be created to enable tracking of foster youth college outcomes. So within the Chafee system, there is a data match between CSAC, which is the agency that oversees the Chafee program, and CDSS, the California Department of Social Services. And this data sharing allows CSAC to automatically know who's a foster youth and who isn't. And it's been enormously effective in streamlining the application process. It means that Chafee grant applicants don't have to go get their own verification of foster youth status. And so creating some similar data match between college systems and CDSS would also allow for much more accurate tracking of foster youth outcomes within the college system. And we're talking here about de-identified data, so this would be providing aggregate information that would track overall trends. We're not talking about information that would be person-specific. The second recommendation is that back in 1996, there was a bill that I had referenced earlier called AB 2463, and that bill requires that community college and CSU systems track foster youth retention rates. And the community college system actually just recently made course retention and completion data for self-identified foster youth available as part of their Data Mart system, which is online. But the CSU system has not at this point implemented this regulation. So in light of extended foster care, we believe that the bill should be amended, the law should be amended to include both current and former foster youth, and should require that the data be made publicly available, and it should be implemented within the CSU system and recommended for implementation at the UC system. So those are the final two recommendations of our document, and I'm going to turn it back over to Amy for Q&A.
Thank you, Debbie. We have a number of questions, and so if you haven't already, please put them in to the little control panel, and we'll shoot through as many as we can in the remaining period of time. The first one, I think, is for you, Debbie. It's really more about practice on the ground. Does going to a college that's on the quarter system reduce a foster youth's chances of getting limited Chafee funds because it starts later?
The answer to that question is no. It makes no difference whether somebody's on a semester or a quarter system. Typically, the financial aid process and determination of what aid somebody is eligible for actually happens quite a bit in advance of the actual start of the term. And so what does make a difference is whether somebody gets their application in by the March 2nd deadline. That impacts not only Cal Grant, but also does impact eligibility for Chafee. So that is what's crucial, not whether it's a semester or a quarter campus.
All right, thank you. Next question also for you, Debbie, or Cecilia, whoever would like to take it. The person is saying, do young people who complete a FAFSA but don't go to college get in trouble if they complete it and then don't go to school?
The answer is no, they don't get in trouble. They shouldn't accept any actual cash if they're not actually enrolling in school, but just the act of completing a FAFSA, there's no negative consequences or repercussions of that whatsoever. So we highly recommend that a young person who is even remotely considering attending college the following year complete the FAFSA by the March 2nd deadline. There's nothing to lose by completing the FAFSA, even if they don't end up ultimately attending school.
So it sounds like you're saying they actually have to enroll in school to access that funding.
Correct. They do have to enroll in classes in order to receive the funding. And there's actually, there can be consequences if somebody accepts the money, cashes a check, and then disenrolls from classes and doesn't attend school.
All right, so this is a follow-up just to confirm. So the needs analysis report being delayed until September is not a problem. So I think we're talking about the Chafee grant. If the needs analysis report is, for a young person who's attending a quarter system, that isn't, that's not going to affect anything.
Well, so one of the recommendations that you might have noticed on the Chafee administration piece is that we recommend the elimination of the needs analysis report as part of the Chafee application process. So for those who are not familiar, basically what this means is that the campus has to do an analysis of the financial aid need for the student and provide that to CSAC before CSAC processes the Chafee application. And that can create delays, in particular if the college doesn't complete the needs analysis report in a timely manner, or where it really makes a difference actually is not so much the semester versus quarter, but community college versus four-year university. Because typically the four-year universities complete their needs analysis reports much further in advance than the community college financial aid offices do. And so community college students can be disadvantaged by the need for that NAR, as it's called. And there are other ways to establish the amount of need based on the FAFSA itself rather than actually requiring that the NAR be submitted. So we believe that step should be eliminated from the process.
All right. So here's a question. It says one of our recommendations is to create accountability around financial aid completion. So who is currently, in our current system, who is accountable for helping youth. If it's not the social worker, who is specified as the person who is supposed to ensure that young people likely participating in college in the autumn complete that? Where can we turn to until these policy recommendations change?
Unfortunately, the answer is nobody. There's no single person who is identified as having that responsibility. So it really falls to the youth to figure out themselves. There's resources to help them, like at ILP programs and foster youth services programs, but if they're not aware that they should be doing it in the first place, there's nobody tasked with making sure that they know about that.
Great. I think I'll take this next question. It's about SB 1023, a little bit more information. The question is, what criteria will be used to determine the EOPS programs that will participate in the pilot year once funding for SB 1023 is approved, and when will the announcement to these colleges be made so adequate preparation can be made by those programs to build an additional support for foster youth? The great news is this is a voluntary program, so no EOPS program that's not interested in it has to apply for it. So the bill authorizes the Chancellor's Office to kind of develop a competitive process where programs would specify how they want to implement the program. As for the overall kind of program structure, as Cecilia mentioned, the Chancellor's Office has gotten private funding to begin to develop the framework for that, and they are very committed to having a lot of community and campus input and are creating an advisory body. So if anyone's interested in participating on that, we can help you connect so that you can play a role in shaping that state program. But the job one is to get the funding. Right now there is no funding. And so, but hopefully we will have the opportunity to figure out how it's going to be distributed. So next question, back to you, Debbie. Since the Chafee application only allows one school of interest, what do you do if youth want to apply to multiple schools?
I think that the most important thing for a youth to know is that as they start to hone their decision around what school they're going to attend, that they keep CSAC informed. So they can indicate what their first school of choice is, and then once they determine where they're actually going to school, if it's different from the school that they specify, they have to let CSAC know. As long as they are keeping CSAC informed of the changes in their status, there shouldn't be a problem.
Okay, I think the next one is kind of a question and comment. Are there any planned changes with Chafee regarding kin gap eligibility or guardianship placements, non-probate? The person comments, I've had kin gap youth drop out of school for lack of funding because they unfortunately had their kin gap case start at 15 instead of 16. And so I think this commenter is making a very reasonable point where, because California implemented extended foster care in compliance with the federal requirements, which essentially, indicate 16 as the magic year and if young people exit to guardianship prior to that, then they do not benefit from extended care. So I think there are a lot of equity issues around that, but there are not any proposals to change Chafee on the horizon. And as Debbie's reminded me also, that's due, again, because this is a federal criteria. Now, of course, California could create its state-only Chafee program to kind of close that loophole, but I do not know of any proposals that are on the horizon. But it's a really good comment. So another question for you around FYS definitions, Debbie. Said, Debbie, you spoke of the misalignment of the definition between FYS and LCFF. What is the definition in colleges? Can they have been living with relatives?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so the simple answer is yes, they can have been living with relatives. Now, the more complicated answer is there's not a single definition of foster youth for the purposes of colleges and universities. There's a definition for FAFSA, independent status. There's a definition for Chafee. There's a definition for participation in a Guardian Scholars Program. And all those definitions can be slightly different. However, typically what you see is that the differences in definitions have to do with the age that the young person was in foster care and their current age. I myself have never actually seen a distinction made in a foster youth definition for eligibility for any program based on whether somebody was placed with relatives or not. So aligning the foster youth services definition with LCFF would actually also align that definition with what's typical for the college setting.
All right, here's a question. This person says that we're stating that the local LCAP programs haven't made the difference that we were hoping for foster youth. Are there examples of jurisdictions that have, and could the language in those LCAP program documents be made publicly available?
Yeah, I mean, the most notable county is Los Angeles County. So their LCAP, they really went above and beyond in terms of being very specific for how they're allocating resources for foster youth. And I do believe that LCAPs are publicly available. So we believe that if you go to the California Department of Education website, they are posted there. The EdTrust West publication as well. I'm not remembering off the top of my head which other counties were highlighted besides Los Angeles, but there's a couple of other counties as well.
Thank you, Debbie. So there is a clarification from someone that says initial awards for Chafee take place in July. So that's more of a comment I'll throw out there. And so one other question is, are other financial aid programs automated? The recommendation was that this is something that should happen for Chafee. Would this make it different than the other financial aid programs?
So it would actually make it the same as other financial aid programs. So the Cal Grant program awards are issued electronically. They are not awarded through paper checks. So this would actually align the Chafee program with other financial aid programs in the state.
Thank you. And then one clarification, someone asked what the data system was for, it's called CalPass, not CalPlus, but CalPass. Can you just say maybe a couple words about what is CalPass?
Yeah, so it's actually, the actual true name of the system right now is CalPass Plus. And this is different from CalPADS with a D that some people might be familiar with. CalPADS is the K-12 system. CalPass Plus is the system that pulls from all systems, K-12, community college, four-year universities, and there are actually plans to pull data from EDD about employment outcomes as well.
Great. Well, thank you very much. So with that, what is ahead? You know, I think at this point this is a set of policy recommendations, but they're words on a piece of paper, and they're only going to make a difference in the lives of young people in foster care if they jump off that paper and into practice. And so, again, based on who you are and what role you play, we'll help you really look deeply at this document and think about, you know, what you can move forward in your personal capacity. The document is up at the California College Pathways website. And then, as we alluded to earlier, we are going to be having a policy briefing in Sacramento together with the National Center for Youth Law, which is going to offer some in-depth information about the report regarding the cumulative focus of the local accountability plans on foster youth. So we hope you will all consider attending that if you're able to. So thank you very much, Debbie and Cecilia, for presenting on today's web seminar. And again, this report was really made possible due to all the people who gave their time to be interviewed. We appreciate it very, very much. Great. So thank you very much, and we are going to, with that, conclude today's web seminar.